Welcome to our third and last video covering modern notation in Sibelius. In our first video in this series on Sibelius, which you can find up here, we looked at the basics of how to enter music and the different workflows Sibelius offers for writing orchestral music. In the second video, we covered all kinds of notational challenges in modern music and how we could accomplish them in Sibelius. In this last video, we're going to be looking at playback in detail with and without NotePerformer. Then we'll cover score and part preparation, MusicXML import and export, features unique to Sibelius, and that all-important factor, the price tag. And it looks like Billy's gonna be here for this video too.
Sure are you, partner? I can't wait to help you show all these folks how to use Sibelius again.
Help me. Yeah, sure.
Well, what you waiting for? Let's get started.
There's a lot of ground to cover regarding playback. Lots of instruments, playing techniques, discussion of balance, support for customization, etc. So the way we're going to approach this is to go through each section of instruments and play back a few samples of each instrument, including any special techniques I've used with both Sibelius Sounds and NotePerformer.
Hang on. You're going to go through every single instrument and play each part back with both Sibelius Sounds and NotePerformer?
Well, yeah, that's the plan.
There ain't no way. We're going to be here for hours. I might have been dozing off during the last video, but I might as well go get my sleeping bag and camp out for the night if you're going to do that.
Okay, so what do you suggest instead?
Just play back the special techniques and then the whole piece, and we'll call it a day, partner.
You really think so? You don't want to hear the differences in each instrument between the two sound libraries?
No, I really don't.
All right, then, we'll try it your way. I haven't used a lot of unusual wind techniques in this piece, since many of them, like air notes or slap tongue, are notated in straightforward ways, and I was striving more for notational challenges rather than playback challenges in this piece. However, there are a few techniques of note. First, feathered beams. We'll start with Sibelius Sounds. As you can tell, it just plays it as a normal tuplet and doesn't accelerate throughout the beam. Perhaps that's to be expected since we actually notated it as a tuplet and then just changed the beam. Next, we'll play this tremolo. Sibelius chose to play it back as measured 30-second notes rather than an unmeasured tremolo. That's reasonable. I didn't specify, and the piece is sufficiently slow that it's quite playable as 30-second notes, although in this case I actually wanted it to be played unmeasured. But it's odd that it sounds like each note is individually tongued. Let's look at flutter tongue. Now this is interesting. It's playing a flutter tongue sound, but again as individual 30-second notes rather than a sustained tone. This I find less reasonable since this is the standard way of notating flutter tongue. Next, plosives. Well, they just sound like ordinary notes, unsurprisingly. No sound library that I know of can actually play flute plosives. and they were barely audible to me at least, despite the mezzo forte dynamic marking. Now, maybe that's reasonable because it's low on the flute, but a good flute player can still make a low D sound fairly loud if they want to. Now let's move to the third clarinet part and hear this measured tremolo with the double staccato marking over it. We'll start here at the written out 32nd notes. Yeah, that was great. The measured tremolo sounded exactly like the 30 seconds before it, which means that our playback settings of the double staccato articulation that we put in last time worked exactly how we had hoped. Now, the multiphonic sounded just like 3 clarinets playing rather than a real multiphonic, but that's to be expected because I did input it as a chord after all, and I wouldn't expect Sibelius to know how to play every multiphonic. Now that we've auditioned Sibelius Sounds, let's try NotePerformer. To do this, we'll go up here to the Play menu, then select the pop-out icon next to Setup. As you can see, Sibelius has a few different playback configurations defined. Since I have NotePerformer installed, it appears in the list. So we'll select that, and after a brief pause while it loads, you can see NotePerformer in the active devices over on the right. I'm not really going to go into any details here, but you can also create your own sound sets using VSTs if you'd like. I should also mention that a quicker way of changing between playback configurations is using this configuration button up here. Now that we're using NotePerformer, we'll start again with the feathered beam. It plays back in just the same way. Now the tremolo. The tremolo is still measured 30 seconds, but at least the slurred notes do sound slurred. And flutter tongue. That sounds much better. It doesn't play back individual 30-second notes this time, but sounds like a quarter note played using flutter tongue. We'll try the plosives too. Yep, they sound just like normal notes, but at least I could actually hear them this time. Finally, the clarinet multiphonic. Yep, it sounds much the same, more like 3 clarinets than an actual multiphonic. But again, that's to be expected. I don't know of any sample library that has a comprehensive set of clarinet multiphonics, less still one that can translate notation into the correct multiphonic. I haven't really used any extended techniques at all in the brass, just mutes and stopped horn.
Well, y'all don't even know one end of the trumpet from the other anyhow.
Hey now, I do indeed know how to write for trumpet. Or at least I know people like my friend Steve who know how to write for trumpet, which is nearly as good.
Oh, really? So tell me then, what's the difference between a trumpet and a cornet?
Can I phone a friend?
Yeah, that's what I thought. Alright, go ahead and show us your mutes then.
Yeah, we'll start with Sibelius Sounds again. Here's the initial consort section. As you can tell, there's a very noticeable difference between the timbre at forte and fortissimo. Here's the senza sword passage after that. One thing you'll notice is that the C 3/4 flat, concert F 3/4 flat, sounds like a C double flat or concert F double flat. In other words, quarter tones don't play back properly in Sibelius. In fact, if I select the C 3/4 flat and then the B flat next to it, you'll see that they sound exactly the same. Next, we'll play the stopped section at the end. To me, that does actually sound different from the muted horn, but I can't tell if that's just a difference in dynamics or if it's actually using different samples for stopped versus muted. Now let's move on to the trumpet. Here's the straight mute section. And here's the open note right after that. To me, the fortissimo didn't seem much louder than the piano in that decrescendo, which it definitely would on a real trumpet.
How would you know?
But we'll see if it sounds better in the context of the rest of the orchestra later. Likewise, we can move on to the trombones and see the difference between the straight mute at the beginning and the open section later. Again, not a huge difference between fortissimo and pianissimo, but we'll listen to the whole piece later. Also, this may be personal preference or just a difference in individual instruments, but that trombone sounded rather tinny in the piano section. I think a real trombone would sound a little rounder, especially at this soft dynamic. And now we'll switch over to NotePerformer. First, let's listen to the horn concertino section. Yep, sounds like a muted horn, and with much less difference between forte and fortissimo, which is what I would expect. Then I'll play back the senza sword part after this. I have to say, that is a lovely horn sound, to my ears at least. But again, it doesn't play back the 3/4 flat properly. And finally, here's the stopped passage at the end. That doesn't sound particularly stopped, but then a stopped horn at soft dynamics doesn't really sound all that different from an open horn, a fact that Beethoven and others took full advantage of in writing for natural horn. Now we'll go over to the trumpet part. Here's the straight mute section. Yep, sounds like a muted trumpet all right, and here's the open note after it. Now that sounds much more like a real trumpet decrescendo to me. Trumpets can get very loud and very soft, and NotePerformer's trumpet to me sounds extremely realistic, especially when smoothly transitioning between dynamics like this.
If you say so, Mr. Expert.
You're not helping, Billy. And finally, we'll go over to the trombones. Here's the muted section at the beginning. To be perfectly honest, that doesn't sound all that muted to me, and it's not nearly as loud as a real trombone would be. Then the open section later. Yeah, that decrescendo again was perfect, and the soft section after it sounded nice and round to me. There aren't a whole lot of unusual techniques in the percussion, since most percussion special techniques just involve symbols or text like mallet symbols, which are easy to notate. However, we'll cover a few fairly common effects I have used. We'll start with the timpani. In measure 3, we have a staccato note marked secco, which literally means dry, and indicates that the timpanist should damp the head of the drum immediately after striking it. Just for good measure, I've actually put a damp symbol on the following rest as well, although it's not really necessary. So let's see how Sibelius Sounds plays this. Well, that was definitely not damped, and honestly, timpani marked forte should be quite a bit louder. Now let's switch over to the snare drum. I've got a part for the snare drum that says snares off, and a part that says snares on. I'll play the first one first, and then the second one. Well, I think maybe there was a difference, but it's hard to tell if it was just different samples for the different dynamics or if it was truly snares off versus snares on. Alright, now for the marimba part. By the way, I should mention that actual marimba players would not want the part notated like this. They would want all 4 notes to be on a single stem with a tremolo marking. However, I notated it like this to test cross-staff tremolo before I realized that Sibelius wouldn't let me switch to a grand staff from a single staff. So let's hear this played back. I really like that realistic low marimba sound. Again, it's playing measured 30-second notes, which isn't really what I wanted, but Sibelius had no way of knowing. Also, it's a lot louder than I would expect a marimba to be at mezzo piano. But maybe it'll sound balanced in the full piece, we'll see. Finally, let's test out laissez vibratis in the tam-tam part. That sounded like it was damped at the end of the measure to me. A tam-tam usually has a very long delay, much longer than a measure would last in this piece. Alright, back to NotePerformer. Let's try out these passages again, starting with the timpani. Yes, that was definitely damped, and it sounded properly forte as well. Moving on to the snare drum now. There's the snares off version. Yeah, the snares off section definitely sounded like the snares were still on. Now let's try the marimba. Yeah, it still sounds pretty good, although, again, still a bit louder than I would expect from a marimba at mezzo piano. And lastly, the tam-tam. Yeah, again, it sounds like it was damped at the end of the measure, and it's not very loud for a tam-tam at fortissimo. You should be able to hear that clear above the rest of the orchestra. First, I'll just warn you that neither Sibelius Sounds nor NotePerformer will sing words for you. There are AI software packages like Cantai or Ace Studio that will do that for you, but I'm afraid I don't own either one, so the baritone will just be singing ahs on every note.
Well, that's just fine. I didn't want to hear any caterwauling today anyway.
Now, we only have a couple things to cover. We'll start with this microtonal gliss from D to D quarter flat. By the way, I have the piano muted in the mixer so that we can clearly hear the baritone. Well, it went down an entire half step, and it wasn't much of a gliss, to be honest. It sounded pretty much like two separate notes. And the other odd thing that I noticed is that it sounded like a choir, not an individual singer, even though I did select the solo baritone instrument. Now let's try this scream passage near the end. Well, it did gliss down from the first note to the second, but not from the second to the third. Now let's switch to NotePerformer and try both of those passages again. Well, still not much of a gliss there, if any, but at least it does sound like one singer instead of a choir. And next, the scream passage. Well, that gliss was kind of chopped up, and it still didn't gliss from the second note to the third. Again, this is probably due to the fact that Sibelius doesn't really support glissing across more than two notes at once. Okay, we're going to cover the harp, followed by the strings.
The harp is a stringed instrument?
Yes, I know, but there was enough to cover on the harp that I decided to separate it out into its own section.
And what about the guitar?
There's no guitar in this piece, Billy.
That was my point.
Alright, well, let's get on with it. The first thing we'll try is those nested tuplets at the beginning. Yeah, I could definitely hear that the 4/3 tuplets were faster than the other notes, and that harp sounds quite realistic too. Next, we'll try the harmonics immediately afterward. Well, I couldn't really tell if those were harmonic sounds or not, but they were definitely in the wrong octave. Harp harmonics sound an octave above the written notes. Next, let's take a look at these glissandi to grace notes and across staves. Well, I'm not sure what that was, but it definitely didn't sound anything like what I wrote. And finally, we'll try this downward arpeggiando notation. It was a little hard to hear, but I think the upper chord was rolled downwards and the bottom chord was rolled very slightly upwards. Let's try again. Yeah, I think that's right, but it's hard to be sure. Okay, let's switch to NotePerformer and try again. Not quite as nice as Sibelius sounds to my ears, at least. Let's try the harmonics. Yeah, still the wrong pitch. Yeah, now the glissandi. Yep, still sounds the same and nothing like what I wrote. And finally the arpeggiando passage. Yep, it sounds much the same too. I'd actually give a slight edge to Sibelius Sounds here. To me, its harp sounds a bit more realistic, and NotePerformer doesn't give us any particular advantage during playback. I've used quite a few interesting techniques in the strings, so let's start with the violins. At the beginning, we have some tremolo artificial harmonics. A lot of sample libraries struggle when you combine techniques like tremolo and harmonics and mutes because they have to have samples for every individual combination. So let's see how Sibelius Sounds handles this. Well, it doesn't handle it. It was very quiet, almost inaudible, and the notes played as double stops rather than harmonics. Also, the solo violin sounded like a whole violin section, but we could fix that by changing the instrument to a solo violin on that staff if we wanted. We'll also try playing this natural harmonic in violin too. Again, it was nearly inaudible, but it played back as just a normal note, not a harmonic. As with the other tremolos we've looked at, Sibelius used measured 30-second notes rather than an unmeasured tremolo, which is reasonable considering the slow speed of the piece. Next, bow pressure wedges. Well, if you saw how I notated that by stacking a bunch of lines on top of each other, it shouldn't be surprising that Sibelius had no idea that I wanted it to play back as high bow pressure. And finally, aleatoric boxes. Well, it played the notated notes, but it didn't repeat them. We could probably hack around this by inserting notes on a separate staff that is played but not shown, but I didn't bother. Okay, on to the viola. In measure 6, they play colegno, so let's see how Sibelius Sounds handles this. Yep. It played back colegno, and at a realistically quiet volume too, despite the forte dynamic. Next, we have the sul tasto to ordinario to sul ponticello passage. Interesting. Sibelius Sounds doesn't realize that sul tasto and ordinario kind of negate the previous colegno, and it doesn't like changing articulation in the middle of a tied note, as you can see. Now we'll pull up the cello part and play this divisi glissando, which ends on a different interval than it starts on, to see how Sibelius Sounds handles this. Honestly, I'm impressed. It smoothly glissed both notes in the chord. So it must separate these into different channels, or maybe it's not using MIDI pitch bend, since that affects the entire MIDI channel. And finally, we have snap pits in the double bass. I'm surprised to hear that Sibelius Sounds doesn't support snap pits, which is particularly common in the double bass. But there you go. Now we'll switch over to NotePerformer and try all these again. We'll start with the violins. Yeah, it definitely played these back as harmonics this time, but in contrast to Sibelius Sounds, they were arguably too loud. What about the natural harmonic in violin 2? No, it doesn't know how to play that back. That's a shame. We could always put an E under the A to get it to play back, but that means a slightly different thing to a violinist, so we'll just live with the wrong playback for now. Let's try the bow pressure wedges and aleatoric boxes. Well, unsurprisingly, it did the same thing as Sibelius Sounds, simply because Sibelius doesn't send the relevant information over to the sound engine. Now the colegno and the violas. Yeah, still sounds pretty realistic. And the sul tasto to sul ponticello following it. Interesting, NotePerformer did change to ordinario mid-note, but it still didn't sound sul ponticello at the end of it, to my ears at least. Let's move on to the cello. Yep, the gliss still sounds good. And finally, the double bass. Now that was a snap pits. Now that we've dissected the differences in individual instruments, let's try playing the entire piece. We'll start with Sibelius Sounds again. And now we'll try NotePerformer. In my opinion, NotePerformer is superior in terms of balance and supported techniques, although I do like that Harp in Sibelius Sounds. NotePerformer's strings tend to be a little too loud, and its lower brass tends to be a little too soft, but otherwise it's quite balanced. But in Sibelius Sounds, I could barely hear the strings at all, and there are passages like at the beginning in the brass where you can clearly hear the changeover from one set of samples to another rather than them blending smoothly. In both Sibelius Sounds and NotePerformer, the harp was much louder than it would be in a real orchestra.
What about the guitar? I'm just messing with you, partner. Don't you mind.
You really do want me to put a guitar part in there, don't you?
That's your piece. You do what you want. Now, if it were my piece, I can tell you it would have a guitar somewhere.
Yeah, I bet it would. In our last video, we did most of the hard work of entering the music into the score. However, there's more we need to do in order to prepare our final score and parts. In the parts, we need to insert cues after any long rests, and we need to insert page breaks at appropriate points where there's enough time for the player to turn the page. First, we'll tackle the cues. This is easy enough in Sibelius. The first thing I like to do is to go to the Layout menu and turn off Focus on Staves, so that everything is visible. Don't worry, we'll turn it back on again after we're done. Now let's figure out what instruments are coming in after a long rest. Here's a good example. The horns and lower brass were already playing at the beginning of the piece, but the trumpets come in for the first time at measure 9. That's quite a long rest, so let's insert a cue. It's good to cue based on someone other than the soloist, because they usually won't be there until the last rehearsal or two before the performance. So we'll pick the oboe. First, we'll select an appropriate passage, like this, and make sure you choose the oboe 1 staff and not the oboes 1 through 3 staff. Then we'll copy and go down to the corresponding measure in the trumpet 1 part and hit Option Command Shift V or Control Alt Shift V on Windows for paste as cue. We'll actually do this for all 3 trumpet parts while we're at it. You'll see that what Sibelius does is to insert some small gray notes and text that says oboe 1. It's gray because it's hidden in the full score. If we go to the trumpet 1 parts, you'll see that it appears there with a proper transposition and isn't gray, which means that it isn't hidden. If we go back to the full score and paste the same cue in the trombone 1 parts, you'll see that the notes are ridiculously high. That's because they're in the bass clef. But if you go into the trombone 1 part, you'll see that it did insert a treble clef, just in the part, not in the score, so that the cue appears with a sensible number of ledger lines there. Finally, back in the full score, we'll turn focus on staves back on to get rid of all those extra staves. Now let's talk about page breaks. This piece is intentionally short, since I didn't want to make you all sit through me playing a 10-minute piece over and over in several successive videos.
Yeah, we just have to sit through you droning on and on for hours instead.
Thanks for your vote of confidence, Billy. Anyway, the piece is short, so most of the parts only take up a page or at most 2 pages. However, Sibelius does have this really great feature where it will automatically insert page breaks in parts where there are rests, which, as far as I know, no other notation software does at present. That can be a big time saver if you have a lot of parts to prepare. However, there are a couple issues with it. First, let's look at the Harp part. To bring up the Auto Breaks controls, we'll go to the Layout menu and select the Auto Breaks button. You can see that there are several options we can set to tweak the functionality to our liking, although the default settings work pretty well. In the Harp part, however, you'll see that there are a few problems with the current layout. First, the notes are intersecting the beams in the first bar, and in fact, the rehearsal letter A is poking above the pedal diagrams on the previous system. There are some more intersections down here with the dynamics, and then the last bar is intersecting the copyright notice and almost falling off the edge of the page. I would have thought this would trigger a line break, but as it turns out, even if we drag some staves down, Sibelius just tries to cram more and more into the remaining space. It takes quite a bit of dragging down for it to finally realize that there really just isn't enough room to fit everything in and move the last staff to the next page. Next, we'll look at the violin 1 parts. Now, at first glance, this does seem like a good place for a page break, but actually, that's not a rest, that's a continuation of the previous aleatoric repeated section. So, in fact, all the violinists are playing there. A better place for a page break would be here. Happily, this is easy to fix. We can select the bar line where we want a page break and hit Command-Enter or Control-Enter on Windows to insert a page break, and there we have it. Nice and easy. Now in this case, since there are only 2 pages total, I would actually just insert a title page so that the first page of music is on a left page instead of a right page. Then you don't care where the page break is since the 2 pages of music are right next to each other. But if you have a longer score, you'll have to actually find good places for page breaks as I've shown you here. The other thing you'll need to do is, of course, your score preparation. Some of that just comes down to detailed engraving and tidying everything up and making sure nothing is too squished together. But a professional score almost always has a title page and then a page of front matter, instrumentation, duration, performance notes, and program notes. Now, Sibelius has a convenient built-in way of generating a title page for you. You just go to the Layout tab and hit this button, and hey presto, it generates a title page for you. I've added an extra page at the beginning for adding all the other front matter. Now, if all we need is a text box, this works great. I can right-click on the blank page, go to Text, Blank Page Text, and Plain Text on Blank Page. Then I can click on the page and Sibelius will insert a text box and I can just start typing. I'll change the text size to something more readable. However, oftentimes performance notes include musical samples, and I haven't found any good way of including those. So what I tend to do is to make my title page and front matter in a word processor like Word or LibreOffice, paste in musical samples as I need to, generate PDFs from both the word processor and Sibelius, and finally paste them together using an online tool like ilovepdf.com. It's a bit clunky, but it works. Everything we've been covering is just great if you're starting from scratch in Sibelius, but what if you're moving from some other notation program to Sibelius? Chances are you've already got lots of scores already sitting around that you'll need to import. So how do you do that? Well, the industry standard music format that all the leading notation programs support is called MusicXML. And as it happens, I've already input this score into all the major notation programs, even Finale, despite the fact that at this point it's actually out of support. And I've generated MusicXML files for each one, so we can see all the problems that we may encounter importing music from each one.
Is this like one of them cooking shows where they throw a bunch of stuff in a dish every which way and then stick it in the oven and a few seconds later, they pull out a perfectly baked casserole?
Not really.
Oh, okay then, well, keep going.
Right. So first, I'll show you how to export a MusicXML file from a Sibelius score. We'll start by going to the File menu and selecting Export on the left, then MusicXML. You'll see that Sibelius gives you a nice warning that says I've got graphical elements that can't be exported in an uncompressed file. And since the compressed ones are smaller anyway, I figure I'll use that. Then I'll hit the big Export button, choose a file, and hey presto, we've got a MusicXML file. Now, one thing that's always kind of interesting is to import the same file back into Sibelius to see what happens.
Hey, is this like when you translate something from English into Urdu, into Greek, into Cherokee, and back into English and see what kind of nonsense it makes?
Yeah, Billy, I guess it's like that, kind of, sort of. Anyway, to import a MusicXML document, we'll go to New, then Import, then MusicXML, and select the file we want. First, we'll try this one that we just exported and see what happens. Sibelius gives us a few options that we can select from. We want to let it use the original page sizes, but in general, even when importing scores from Sibelius itself, I would advise that you turn off the Use Layout and Formatting from MusicXML checkbox. Otherwise, I've found the staves end up fixed in rather odd positions after the inevitable adjustments that we have to make after importing. We'll let Sibelius choose instruments automatically based on what's in the file, and there we have it. You'll immediately notice that this looks quite different from our original score. Well, one big reason is that the import did not preserve which staves were visible and when. We had been using the Focus on Staves functionality so that we weren't showing all of the individual instrument staves in the full score. So we'll go to the Layout tab, click on Focus on Staves, and deselect all the staves that we don't want to appear. Okay, that's better, but we're still showing extra staves in places. like in the violins, where they're not playing divisi, and in the clarinets, where they're supposed to be condensed. So let's get rid of those two. We'll select all the violin staves by triple-clicking, hitting Command down 3 times to select all the staves. Then go to Empty Staves, Hide, and nothing happens. That's because there's an engraving option we need to set. We'll go to Appearance, Engraving Rules, Staves, and then uncheck the Show Hidden Empty Staves when using Focus on Staves, because we want those empty staves hidden, not shown. And hey presto, the empty violin staves disappear. We'll do the same thing for the clarinets too. Okay, now we've got our score sort of how we want it, at least in broad strokes. So let's take a look at things that didn't import properly. Here's what I've noticed. The spacing on the staves is not quite what it was in the original, although it's still reasonable for the most part. You might think it's because I unchecked the Use Layout and Formatting from MusicXML checkbox, but I assure you that it's much worse when I leave it checked. Every bar and every staff has these manual spacing labels on them. And for some reason that happens regardless of whether I tell Sibelius to preserve the original layout or not. However, we can delete them all if we want to, without too much effort. Only the outermost staff labels are preserved, and all line breaks are eliminated. For example, the bass trombone tuba staff label runs together, and the player numbers on all the condensed wind staves are missing. Any even slightly unusual symbols like snap pits, or damping, or even harmonic symbols just show up as these MusicXML importer comments. Quite a lot of slurs are missing, for example, here in the harp, or in the horn 3 and 4 staff. Some are there, but are reduced to tiny smudges, like this one in the horn 1 and 2 staff. Feathered beams don't import properly, such as in the flute here. The cues are hidden, but not the slurs and lyrics in the cues. The LV ties are imported as normal ties. Any new lines in the text are erased, which affects all the harp pedals. For example, this F-flat B natural should be on 2 lines, since the F-flat is with the right foot and the B natural is with the left. However, the cross-staff beaming did get imported properly, which kind of surprised me. I can't tell if the nested tuplet here got imported or not. It shows a 9, and there is a secondary beam break before the 4 to 3 tuplet, but I can't tell if there's actually a tuplet there or not. The baritone shows up an octave too high, but it plays back at the correct pitch. Quarter tones are not imported properly. This should be a D quarter flat, for example. Some playback instruments are not set properly. For example, the violins are using a piano sound for some reason. The note heads do seem to be correct, though. The 3 plus 4 over 12 bar imported as 3 plus 4 over 8, although there is this weird 3 plus 4 1 2 text at the top of the score. The fake 12/8 in the baritone sort of got imported. The line break was removed, so it just says 128, and surprisingly, the fake tempo equation was actually imported correctly. Some of these tuplets in the 3 plus 4 over 12 bar didn't get imported quite right. They're in the wrong place, and there are even some notes missing. All the hidden tuplets are shown, and the dashed bar line was lost as well. Instrument changes are lost, along with the corresponding staff type changes, although the instrument change labels are still there. When the snare drum changes to toms, it should be on a 5-line staff, and then on a 2-line staff when the bongos come in, but it's on a 1-line staff the whole way through. The bass drum changes to a tam-tam, but the tam-tam note appears below the staff. None of the percussion parts sound when I click on them. Tremolos, like in the marimba, are imported but are the wrong duration and have a tuplet for some reason. All of our custom cymbals, like the trills, the multiphonic and the clarinet, and the double staccato, are lost. Our manual gliss adjustments in the harp and baritone are lost. It did actually keep the custom beaming in violin too, including across the bar line. For some reason, there's this big coda marking above the top of the system in measure 12. All the aleatoric boxes and the following lines disappeared. The hidden whole bar rests aren't hidden anymore. The downward arpeggiando marking in the harp is just a normal arpeggiando, and it doesn't extend down to both staves. The harp correctly does not have a key signature in the last 2 measures, but neither does the first violin for some reason. The vertical adjustment on the hairpin is gone. And if I open the mixer, you can see that it's lost all the settings for which tracks should be silent.
Well, heck, with all that stuff you just said, you might as well just type it all in again.
Well, I don't know if I'd go that far. I mean, it does still save you quite a bit of time and potential error, but there are a whole lot of things you gotta watch out for.
Yeah, I can sit with that.
Glad to hear it. Here I've imported a file from Finale. I've already hidden the extra staves in the same way as before. Now, to be honest, a lot of the problems are the same as those we covered importing the Sibelius file. In some ways it doesn't work as well as importing Sibelius's own MusicXML exports, but in some ways it actually works better. I'll point out a few differences. The staff labels on staff groups in Finale get applied on each individual staff in Sibelius. That's because Sibelius doesn't really have the Finale concept of staff groups. Instead, it uses extra staves for instruments. Funnily enough, the new lines in staff labels and text actually do get imported properly from Finale, as you can see here in the bass trombone tuba staff, and in the F-flat B natural here. However, special characters like flats and sharps get translated into Bs and hash signs and the word natural, as you can see here, which is not ideal. The last note under each ottava bassa line in the harp should be an octave up, and the cross-staff information in the harp has been lost. Happily, in this case, the baritone is actually at the correct octave. Any slightly unusual symbols like snap pits or harmonic signs or damping symbols are just lost completely. We don't even get a comment from the MusicXML importer like we did with the Sibelius MusicXML file. Quarter tones actually did get imported properly. Now, the microtonal gliss in the baritone seems to be missing, but it's actually there. It's just so small it's invisible. You can see the glissandi in the violas and cellos did in fact get imported properly. In Finale, I had to notate the 3+4/12 bar as 2 actual bars, with the second one not counted in the numbering. This sort of got imported. It did get imported as 2 actual bars, and the second one is still correctly excluded from the bar numbering. However, the time signature says 3/8, not 3+4/12, but the last bar has its time signature hidden, as it does in Finale. Also, the bar line is not dashed, as it should be. I thought at first that these measures in the bongos were on the wrong staff, and all the rest got put on the correct staff. But then I realized that they're actually way below the single line on the top staff, which you can see if I drag the second percussion its staff way down. And in general, you'll see that all the staff type changes are lost. The tempo marks didn't get imported quite right. The closing parenthesis looks like it fell over, and they should be hidden. Some of the textual indications, like this 2 consort indication on the upper horn staff, are duplicated for some reason. In this case, 6 times. The bars that are 12/8 for the baritone and 4/4 for everyone else got marked as straight 12/8, but somehow all the other parts line up. I'm not quite sure how that's working. All the grace notes are missing their slashes, as you can see in the harp glissandi. The Q-sized notes in the last harp bar ended up as normal-sized notes, and again, all the cross-staff beaming got lost. There's a phantom pedal mark in the harp part for some unknown reason. The decrescendos are too long in some cases. And all the niente marks on the decrescendos got lost. So when I import a MusicXML file, I get this ominous warning here about an instrument change XML element that's missing a required attribute. However, it does in fact still import. Okay, now I've imported the MusicXML that I exported from MuseScore, and I've made the same tweaks to the staff visibility that I did with the previous 2. What on earth happened here, partner? Most of the notes are missing! Yeah, a lot of them do seem to be. But, hey, we have feathered beams. Well, I guess if you're using them feathered beams and you don't care about all the notes, then this'll work just great for you. Yeah, and the text is all huge for some reason, and the rests are dotted, and all the secondary beam breaks got lost, and some notes just got clipped out of some of the measures completely, and all the notes in some of the transposing instruments are in the wrong octave. And what on earth is that? I have no idea. But hey, I guess it saves paper if you just print all the music on the same page. Yeah, that definitely did not work at all. I would not recommend importing MusicXML from MuseScore into Sibelius. You'll pretty much have to just input it again from scratch. Here on the screen, I've imported a MusicXML file from Dorico, but this time I haven't made any adjustments to the staff visibility. You'll notice, as I zoom in, that each of the staves is for an individual part, and there are no condensed staves. That's because in Dorico, you input each individual instrument part, and then you set up rules for how they condense onto staves in the full score, or you can just use Dorico's built-in rules, which are actually pretty good. So the MusicXML that gets exported from Dorico is actually the set of individual instruments, not the condensed full score. This is great for parts, but it does mean that you'll have to do the condensing manually after you import into Sibelius. So let's look at some of the quirks of Dorico imports. I'm not going to touch on every little thing, but I'll mention most of the big differences from importing Sibelius's own MusicXML files. First, every percussion instrument gets their own individual staff. They're not combined into players like they are in Dorico. Any clef changes that only occurred in the full score in Dorico are lost, like the bass clef here for the horns in concert pitch at the beginning. All the cues are lost since they aren't just hidden notes in the full score like they are in Finale and Sibelius. They're actually represented in Dorico as dynamic cues that change if the parts change. The slightly unusual symbols, like snap pitch, just disappear completely. You don't get the little comments like you do from the Sibelius imports. All the divisi staves, which operate through a special divisi feature in Dorico, all get crammed into multiple voices on a single staff here in the MusicXML import, even though there are blank staves below it where they ought to go. I haven't tried it, but I imagine that this will cause problems if you're using more than 4 divisi staves, since I think Sibelius only supports 4 voices on a single staff. The quarter tones did get imported correctly. All the harp pedal diagrams, including the textual ones, are completely gone. The 3+4/12 bar got notated as 3/12, which is a little odd. Some of the tied notes in that measure got lost as well. Oddly enough, the split triplet text, the little 3 here, got imported, but the brackets weren't. We've got the same problem as we did in the finale import, in that the tempo equations have a tipped-over closing parenthesis. Some of the dynamics at the ends of hairpins are in the wrong places. Dorico supports parts that each have their own independent time signature. In Dorico, the bongo drums start in 3/8 after a 1/4 bar in measure 9. But Sibelius doesn't support independent time signatures in different parts, so it just ends up importing each 3/8 bar into the next full bar with all the other instruments, which causes a bunch of blank bars at the end for everyone else. Because I had to hijack the stressed note symbol for double staccato in Dorico, all the double staccato articulations got imported as stress symbols, which looks rather odd. Sibelius doesn't support cross-staff stemming, so the notes in these harp chords that are supposed to go to the bottom staff all ended up on the top staff. All the Q-sized notes at the end of the harp part became normal-sized notes. And all the niente decrescendos became normal decrescendos, and some of them were cut off at the end of the piece. So there you have it. There's how a score from each of the other notation programs imports into Sibelius. Everything but MuseScore is usable, and funnily enough, some programs seem to import better into Sibelius than its own exported MusicXML. However, you will definitely have to carefully inspect each score that you import and compare it against a PDF of the original to make sure that you fix all the little things that got broken on imports.
And you missed some stuff too?
Yeah, I probably did. If you're watching this video and you've noticed additional problems importing from MusicXML that I haven't covered, please feel free to drop a comment indicating what you've run into and how you've fixed it.
See, he wants you to do his work for him.
No, it's just that there are tons of people out there who know Sibelius way better than I do.
And you want them to do your work for you?
No, Billy, I want other people to benefit from their experience. I don't know everything.
I never thought I'd hear you say that, Mr. Smarty Pants.
Every notation software has features that set it apart from its competitors, and Sibelius is no different. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on any of these, but we'll quickly cover a few. First, Sibelius is the only notation software I know of with an ideas panel. The idea behind this, no pun intended.
Really?
Okay, the intention behind this is that composers rarely write music in a straight line from start to finish. We often have various ideas like motives or accompaniment patterns
or guitar riffs
or whatever that we assemble together into a finished product. We could just dump all these into a score somewhere, but it's kind of awkward to access these snippets after the fact. So, Sibelius allows us to capture these individually and apply tags to them so that we can easily find them later. Then audition them, edit them, and insert them into any score that we want. So let's take a quick look at how this works. First, Sibelius comes with a library of existing snippets. We can view these by hitting Command-Option-I or Control-Alt-I on Windows. This brings up a little panel to the side, but honestly I prefer the full window, which we can toggle by hitting this button in the lower right-hand corner. Now, as you can tell, Sibelius ships with a wide variety of snippets in many different styles, but to be honest, I haven't found them to be very useful. So let's make our own idea. I'll select this little passage in the oboe here. Then I'll hit Shift-I, and Sibelius will capture that idea. If we hit Command-Option-I again, and scroll to the very bottom, you'll see our idea present. Sibelius gave it a name automatically, and set the key, time signature, and tempo. Unfortunately, it didn't capture the time signature changes in the middle of the idea, because each idea is supposed to be in a single time signature, I guess, which my ideas usually aren't, but that's okay. If we want to rename it or add tags, we can hit the Edit Info button, and do so. If we go back to the compact view, we can hear any of these ideas by just holding the mouse button on any of them, and it will loop until we release the mouse. Now we can filter by just ideas in this score, or select all ideas, and filter by classical or atonal or both. If I want to add the idea to the global library, I can hit this Add to Library button, but in my case I only want this to be in this particular score. Then I can hit Compact View, select, say, the flute staff, and hit this Paste button down here. And hey presto, it inserts the idea into the score. For some reason, it's an octave too low. Maybe it's trying to put it in an easier part of the range, I'm not sure. But we can hit Command Up or Control Up on Windows to transpose it up an octave where we want it. And there we have it, a nice easy way to capture ideas that we can reuse throughout a piece. Another great feature of Sibelius is versioning. You can store multiple versions of the same score in a single file, and then open them individually, copy and paste from them, and even compare two versions against each other. So let's try that with our score. To start, we'll create a new version that we can play with, which will save the old version as a read-only copy in the same file. To do this, we'll go to the Review tab and hit the New Version button. A dialog will pop up asking for the name of the old version of the score, which will become read-only. We'll call it Original Version and hit OK. Now we'll make a few changes. For example, I'll move this oboe line again to the first flute. Now, of course, this is only the condensed full score, not the individual instrument staves, so let's go to the Layout menu and turn off Focus on Staves temporarily. And we'll copy the first oboe's line into the first flute's part as well. Then we'll deselect everything and turn Focus on Staves back off. Now, if we just want to see what versions we currently have, we can hit this Edit Versions button. There are a bunch of actions we can take on this screen, including reverting to a previous version, if you've decided you just need to go back to what you had earlier. But there's also a nice little preview on the right-hand side. If we go to page 2, we can quickly see the difference between the two versions if we toggle between them, or remove those notes from the first oboe to the first flute. If we want to do a more in-depth comparison, we can hit the Compare button, select the two versions we want to compare, and Sibelius will show us a summary. In this case, we added one instrument? What?
Guitar added to revised score. Billy, have you been messing with my score? Who, me? I would never. Okay, well, you can see we have this acoustic guitar part. With tablature! Yes, with tablature. And if we go to the second page, we can see the flute notes in green indicating they were added in this version. And to the right, the oboe notes in red since they were removed. So, as I'm sure you can tell, this can be a really useful feature if you're making changes you're not quite sure about and you want to experiment with a few options. I mentioned the auto breaks feature earlier that I'm not aware of any other notation software having, which can save a lot of time. Another unique feature that Sibelius has that I'm afraid I can't demonstrate is an integration with Pro Tools, a very commonly used DAW, which I'm afraid I don't actually own. However, there is an integration that allows you to copy a passage from Sibelius straight into Pro Tools as MIDI, and similarly copy MIDI straight out of Pro Tools into Sibelius as notation. If you're going back and forth frequently between notation and the DAW, this might be a handy feature for you. The final thing I'll mention is not really a feature, but it's the community. Sibelius has been around for a long time. In fact, I remember when I was in British high school, Sibelius had recently come out and it only ran on this obscure British operating system called RISC-OS. At the time, Sibelius was revolutionary, changing the layout of your score in real time as you entered notation, and the Finn brothers, who had created it, said that it would never run on Windows because Windows was so slow. Well, of course, market share demanded otherwise, and here we are, I'll just say over 30 years later, and Sibelius has become one of the most popular notation software packages of all time. That means that it's got a lot of users and a very active user community. So if you need help solving a problem in Sibelius, you're almost certainly going to be able to find some sort of creative solution online. It also means that there are a lot of scores out there written using Sibelius, and a lot of music publishers only accept scores in Finale or Sibelius format. Another consequence of this large user community is that Sibelius has a huge number of plugins available, both ones that are available for download within Sibelius and ones that can be downloaded separately from third-party developers. A lot of these are working around limitations in Sibelius to add partial support for less common use cases like fretted fifth-string banjos or microtonal harp tunings, or just offering utilities to, say, export all the scores in a directory as MusicXML instead of having to export each one individually. Now, all the notation software I'm covering in this series of videos is pretty popular, but now that Finale has been discontinued, Sibelius is probably the most popular package that's left, and that's certainly a point worth considering if you're trying to figure out which software to learn and use. I've covered a whole lot of reasons why you should use Sibelius. Well, what about reasons you shouldn't?
What, you're gonna drag Sibelius' name through the mud?
Well, I guess a little. I mean, our viewers want to make educated decisions about which software to use, and I feel like this is important information that might influence that decision.
I noticed you said our viewers, not your viewers. You're learning?
Yeah, don't get your hopes up. Anyway, as I mentioned earlier, Avid bought Sibelius in 2006, and in 2012, they fired almost all of the London-based Sibelius development team, despite a worldwide Save Sibelius campaign that garnered over 11,000 signatures. In fact, most of that team was later hired by Steinberg to write Dorico.
Well, that's damn and dirty.
What Steinberg did?
No, firing all them people like that.
Well, yeah, that's why I bring it up.
Also, since that time, as far as I can tell, Sibelius has drastically slowed down its pace of development. I would say that the decondensing support added earlier this year was the first major new feature in years. And as you've seen, Sibelius still lacks some basic things like cross-staff stems that have been part of Western notation for centuries now, not to mention some of the more modern developments that we've discussed workarounds for in previous videos.
So you're saying that people shouldn't use Sibelius?
No, I'm not saying that at all. Every software has its advantages and disadvantages, and I'm trying to let people know what those are. And why do you keep saying Sibelius? It's Sibelius.
Actually, Sibelius was from Finland, and so the correct pronunciation would be something like Sibelius. So why don't you quit correcting my wrong pronunciation with your wrong pronunciation? We'll be square, all right, partner?
Oh, well, okay. Now that you put it that way, I'm sorry.
Hey, that's all right. Don't you fret about it. What are we jawing about next?
All right, now we come to that subject you've all been waiting for, the price.
The bottom line is the bottom line.
Yeah, pretty much. So, as with all these software packages, Sibelius comes in several different editions. Sibelius First is free.
Well, heck, I might as well just download that and use it then.
Well, you can, but it only supports scores with up to 8 staves, with simple notation, with up to 2 voices per staff, no cymbals, and limited samples included. Any orchestral score is going to need more than 8 staves, and I personally need the more complex notation support.
Well, that's because of your fancy schmancy avant-garde stuff. People like me who write normal music with guitars don't need any of that hogwash.
Well, great. If it works for you, go for it. Sibelius Artist is the mid-level product. It costs $99 a year for a subscription, or $149 for a perpetual license with 1 year of updates. It supports up to 24 staves, still with just common notation, some cymbals, 4 voices per staff, and more samples. Sibelius Ultimate is the full-featured professional product. It costs $199 a year for a subscription, or $599 for a perpetual license with 1 year of support and updates. That's the version I've been demonstrating throughout this series, with an unlimited number of staves, 4 voices per staff, and all the cymbals and lines and all that stuff included. It does come with 36 gig of Sibelius sounds, although NotePerformer is a separate product that costs $140 and, in my opinion, is worth every penny. Now, these prices may look pretty high, and they are, but there are often sales where you can get a discount. In addition, if you're switching to Sibelius from some other notation program, you can get a subscription or a perpetual license to Sibelius Ultimate for the price that you'd normally pay for Sibelius Artist. So, for example, I paid $149 since I already owned Finale, and I got a perpetual license for Sibelius Ultimate. And that finally wraps up our coverage of Sibelius, or Sibelius. In the following videos, we're going to be looking at Finale, MuseScore, and Dorico. So, if you enjoyed this video, then be sure to...
Hey, can I do it?
Do what?
You know, the whole like and subscribe thing.
I may regret this, but, sure.
Well, y'all know you like this video. I can tell y'all did. So show us some love and hit that there thumbs up button down there. Also, we're going to have lots more videos about all them other pieces of software that he mentioned. So, if you want to see some more videos of me, and I guess I'll drag him along too, then hit that there subscribe button. Do it now before you forget. I had a hog-killing time.
A what?
A hog-killing time. You know, a real good time.
Okay, sure.
So, I guess I'll see y'all next time. Happy trails, partner.
Yeah, have a good one. There aren't a whole lot of unusual techniques in the percussion, since most percussion special techniques just involve symbols or text like mallet symbols, which are easy to notate. Next up, we're going to talk about beams.
You know, I got a lumberjack
First,
friend
we're going to talk about fan beams, also called feathered beams.
Well, he's okay. He used to dress in women's clothing, and we used to hang around in bars.
What?
That is